We are pleased to be joined by Hall of Famer and Pride of North Dakota, Weston Dressler. Uh, how does that sound to you when you heard it for the first time? Take us to that moment. What was the reaction?
I mean, first of all, it sounds still a little strange to me, but the first time I got the call, it is just kind of almost like a little shock. Not a call that you're just sitting around waiting for and never know when it's going to come, if it's going to come. So to get the call, just kind of sit back and reminisce and think back to all the good old days on the football field. That's for sure.
Talk to us, Wes, about um, your fondest memories. And we know, you've made enough plays, obviously, to get the call. What is that play that sticks out, that is etched in your heart forever?
A couple that I remember. I remember a catch against Winnipeg on a Banjo Bowl game, so a week after Labor Day game, in the back of the end zone. A ball that I remember at the time, once it was in the air, Michael Bishop was our quarterback, and the guy could throw the ball a mile. And I don't know how far down the field I was, and I started kind of jogging, letting up, and all of a sudden he unleashed that ball, and I was like, oh man, I'm gonna look like a fool on film because I slowed down and I'm not gonna be able to get to this ball. But fortunately, I got to it, laid out for it, made a catch in the back of the end zone. So I always remember that one just vividly in my brain. I can still see that ball in the air and trying to track it and go get it. That's one of them. Another one I always remember, touchdown I scored in the 2013 Grey Cup. And not so much that I did a whole lot of good with that one. It was just a perfect ball by Darian, and he dropped it right in the bucket and was able to make the catch. But obviously, just the situation and circumstance of that one sticks out in my brain.
You talked about Winnipeg and those games and the appointment TV that they were, especially in that era and still are now. You got to see both sides of that rivalry. Take us through those experiences and what you learned about each club and each community.
I'm fortunate to play for both of those organizations. Obviously, the first 8 years of my career, I was in Saskatchewan and got to enjoy many Labor Day wins and the crowd on our side. But always traveling to Winnipeg the following week was usually the toughest week as a receiver as far as communication goes, just because of the crowd noise. Trying to get your timing down with the waggle and time things up was pretty much impossible. And I learned that pretty quickly once I was on Winnipeg and traveling to Saskatchewan. I learned that pretty quick. It was about the exact same situation. Rowdy fans, loud fans, fans that are passionate, and I knew that, right? I knew both sides of that, but to experience it on both sides was pretty cool, and to have those experiences with my teammates, I wouldn't trade it.
I want to hear about the beginning stages, man. I want to hear about the process and the progress that made really this interview possible. You're not necessarily your prototypical size as a receiver, but you did work your whole career. How was the beginning process?
I went up to Regina. Honestly, guys, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I knew a little bit about the CFL, but not a lot. Um, I knew the field was bigger, and I knew there was some crazy pre-snap motion going on with receivers because I had seen a game before. Um, but that training camp, that through that rookie camp and training camp was a learning process. And I remember some extremely late nights and early mornings. Um, I remember waking up in those dorms in Regina thinking I was late for practice because the sun was rising at like 4 a.m. That was a little different for me, even though I lived pretty close to there, but just the time change and things like that. But just going through that and constantly being in that playbook, trying to figure out what that 12th guy on the defense was doing out there and how did that change things for me as a receiver and seeing the field and getting in the open spots and zones and things like that. There's so much to it, and I don't remember what game it was, but it was fairly early on in that my rookie season, and we were driving towards the end of the half, and we completed a pass. There was, I think, like 5-6 seconds left in the half, and we just got into field goal range. So I was like, let's go, let's hurry up, let's kick the field goal. And the clock ran to 0. I started walking into the locker room for halftime. I'm like, man, we screwed up. We could have got a field goal out of that. And then I kind of turned around, and field goal team's out there. We're kicking the field goal. So that it was a rule that, I didn't know that the play clock took precedence over the game clock in that situation. And it was a small rule that I hadn't experienced yet at that point. So there's so many little details like that, little things that are different that I learned along the way. I tried to learn as much as I could, as fast as I could, but there's obviously little things you miss and little things that don't get taught, but you figure it out as you go. So for me, the biggest thing I always had to remind myself in those early days was it's still football. When that ball's in the air, when you're running your route, you got to get open. When that ball's in the air, you got to catch it. So I tried to simplify it as much as I could while learning the nuance of the Canadian game versus American football.
So you're now part of that exclusive club, that fraternity of Canadian Hall of Football players, Canadian Hall of Fame football players. But your class is pretty special, going in with some outstanding receivers, all of which you really had to earn your keep in the league. And if we were looking at you in that first rookie camp or training camp, I don't know if people would have picked out you three as potential Hall of Famers, but here you are. Give me your scouting report on the two other receivers you're going in with, S.J. Green and Chad Owens. What about their games, in your mind, knowing how hard the position is, made them special?
Man, I think they're both special in their own ways. Obviously, I'll start with Chad. Similar stature to myself, right? So obviously a guy that I kind of looked up to and admired as he was playing. Especially in the special teams world. I loved returning kicks and punts and got to do that for portions of my career growing up and in the CFL. So watching him do that at such a high level, I admired that, but even more so, he was able to do that while being a top receiver in the league at the same time. So being able to handle both loads of that, I think made him pretty special. He seemed like he never ran out of energy on the field. He always was very energetic, just like always explosive. It seemed like he always had another gear to him when he needed it, no matter what situation he was in. So just a high caliber player, full of energy was the thing that stuck out for me with him. And then SJ, obviously a different build than myself. So I think I kind of admired him or was jealous of him and the things he was able to do because of his size versus the way I had to approach the game. So watching him go up over guys, make just the most incredible catches every year. It seemed like he was, top 1, 2, 3, all of them for best catches or most miraculous catches of the year. So his ability to come down with the ball in those situations was always what stood out for me with him.
Those two guys, when we sat down with them, they always brought up the teams that they were a part of, and especially early on in their careers, and how special the makeup of the teams that they were a part of really was, and especially whether it was even practice roster that they were a part of as well. Very talented. We know that you are a part of the Canadian
Air Force.
The Canadian Air Force. And you were mistaken a lot of times for being a Canadian guy as well, being a part of that crew. Talk to us about how special that was. Talk to us about the impact that you guys had, especially with regards to, the way that you guys approached on the week-to-week basis and how everybody really was fearful of you guys.
Yeah, I love those guys. Obviously, Bag and Getz, I played with my whole time in Saskatchewan, Fan2s for a little while there as well. Those guys were the Canadian Air Force, and I was honored to be an honorary member, being from North Dakota and pretty much Canadian, or mistaken for Canadian many times. But those guys, it was just working together. I felt like we always pushed each other a little bit harder, no matter what. If one guy was down or tired, the rest of the crew would bring them up, and we never let each other get away with anything, slacking off and things like that. So always pushing each other to be the best that we could be. But most importantly, we were best friends and still are really good friends to this day. So to be able to play a game the game that we love and do it with guys that you enjoy being around every single day and having fun with, that's what makes it special. And I think for our as our crew together to be able to win a Grey Cup together, going through some losses and some tough years, to be able to win one together made it pretty special.
You know, we're talking to you at this time of year during training camp when there's a bunch of aspiring players who are just trying to move one step up on the depth chart, just trying to get a couple more reps in practice, in Skelly, make a big play in Indy, all the things that you went through. Given that you've been through it now and you have the benefit of that experience and also some wisdom, if you could give a piece of advice for all those players across Canada who are trying to do what you first did, make a club, secondly, have a long career, and then third, make a real impact in the league and the history of it, what piece of advice would you give them?
The best advice I can give them, obviously, is you got to work your butt off, and I think guys understand that at that point, and you got to continue to work your butt off. But for me, it's you got to stick out in some way, and you got to make a good first impression. So jump at every opportunity you have. As receivers, there's tons of bodies throughout camp, and we know as receivers going in that not everybody's going to be around. But when you're in a situation during training camp and coaches are looking around because they need an extra receiver, I don't care if it's the first group out there, second group out there, third group out there, whoever's out there, you better be sprinting your butt off to get in there and get that extra opportunity. Because you never know which opportunity is going to be the one that you make the big play, the big catch, or the play that stands out and starts to gain you some respect amongst your teammates and your coaches. So find those opportunities and then make the most of them, I think, for the young guys. Then just to continue on in your career, it's never lose that fire, never lose that edge. I think for me, it was always trying to be better than I was the year before, the game before, and understanding it was easy for me because I could see guys that I knew were probably athletically, physically, definitely for sure physically more gifted than I was. So I always felt like I had to outwork people to kind of stand out and to gain an advantage. So just continue to work as hard as I could in the off seasons, in the weight room, get as strong as I could because I knew I was probably never going to be the strongest guy and for sure was never going to be the biggest guy. But I could definitely be the hardest working guy.
Wes, I think when someone like you accomplishes, the things that you have and receives the accolades that you have and ultimately gets inducted into the Hall of Fame, we remember all the pleasant memories and the unforgettable times and moments that you were able to give us all as fans. But I want to hear from your part, from your mind, what was it like as far as the challenges that you had to face before even reaching this day? We're not going to ask you about who was the 13th man, but what was that experience like?
Yeah, I'll go into the 13th man for you. It obviously was not a good situation to be in. Unfortunately for me, I wasn't playing in the game, right? I had an injury towards the end of that year, so I didn't get to go through that playoff run and be a part of that game as a player on the field. But I walked off that field feeling like I was responsible for what happened. Because that whole year I had been the return guy on field goals. So I had done some punt returns as well. And every time as a return guy, I was taught as a little kid, right? At the youngest age, when you first start playing football as a return guy, you count the guys in front of you. You count and make sure, as a kid growing up, I was counting to 10, and I count myself as 11. Once I got up to Canada, I'm counting 11, counting myself as 12. And if you don't get to that number, something's wrong. So I felt like I was partly responsible, one, because I wasn't on the field, but two, because I wasn't doing that. I didn't do it on the sideline. And there were times when I was out, when I was injured, that I was doing that. And for whatever reason, maybe it was the moment in the Grey Cup and thinking we're going to win this thing, I didn't do it that time. And I kick myself now every time I think about that game and that situation, because I could have been a guy on the sideline that stopped it or had done something to prevent it had I been counting. So, whoever the guy was that wasn't supposed to be on the field, it doesn't matter because there's still everybody else on the field, and everybody else got responsibilities. Somebody else could have picked that up too, right? Whether it's a coach in the box, a player on the sideline, a player on the field, there's plenty of guys that could have picked that up and stopped it. That's what makes it hurt so bad, because it's preventable. Those preventable mistakes are the ones that hurt more than anything.
I think the beautiful thing about sport, football, really life is the deepness of those pains is what makes the sweetness of the victories really, really meaningful and vivid. You're in a moment now where you're hearing and seeing so many things, whether it's from Rider fans, Bomber fans, players you played against, teammates of yours, coaches for your team and against you, kind of saying you're getting your flowers. I want to give you the opportunity to do the same. To the CFL community watching, the last question for me is, what message do you have to them about what your experience and your time in the league means to you?
Can't put it in words. I really can't. I mean, I was up there for 11 years, went into a situation that was an opportunity for me to hopefully continue playing football, and that's all that I was asking for. I had no idea how it was going to change my life and shape my life, but it did, and it did in a great way. I was honored a couple years ago to go into the plaza with the Rough Riders, and I concluded my speech at that induction ceremony by bringing my wife and kids up on the stage, because I met my wife playing in Saskatchewan. She's from Regina. I met her up there, and that opportunity to continue playing football and really grow up in Canada as a young adult and grow up into an adult, starting my adult life. I wouldn't trade it anything. I wouldn't trade any of it for anything, because I met my wife there, and that's why I have my family. I got 4 kids now. That's what the game brought me more than anything. It brought me great friendships, and it brought me my kids, and it brought me my wife. Amazing memories and playing the game, and that's all fun and that's good. But the bigger picture now is raising my family, that wouldn't exist if the CFL hadn't called my name.
The amazing thing is that fans across the league, whether you played for them or not, really enjoyed watching you and are happy that you are now enshrined in history for all time. So on behalf of all those fans, thank you so much for your contribution to the game, leaving it in a better spot than you found it, and enjoy all the flowers that you're getting and the proceedings that you're going to have in Hamilton.
I owe gratitude to the country of Canada, obviously Saskatchewan and Winnipeg in particular, for what they did for me. So I couldn't be more thankful for those 2 organizations and the CFL as a whole, and of course the fans that make it so much fun to be up there and playing in front of.